Deleted session, December 14, 1970. Monday. Rob noted, before the session, I asked let Seth discuss two questions. Why Jane's needs had been so bothersome lately, when she was obviously making good progress otherwise. 2. Why I caught a cold last week. Jane's knees had been poor for some weeks. According to my own troubles, my pendulum insisted that I did not have a cold, even though I had all the symptoms. I came down with it after asking Seth last Monday, December 7, whether the tape station we had made for the Clear TV show in Washington and be shown yet. My pendulum also told me that communication problems involving Jane, other than the TV show question, caused the cold. Since I have great faith in the pendulum, I wanted to know why it insisted that I did not have a cold, when I had felt poor indeed all week. I hadn't tried to do any in-depth probing with the pendulum. They said, "Now, good evening. You will have to let me handle this in my own way, the matter of your symptoms and Rupert's needs. But, for a starter, we will begin with you. The pain in your side was a reaction against the first group of symptoms. They gave you a pain in the side. You were angry at yourself for not feeling well." Rob noted, this noon, driving home from work, I pulled a muscle in my right side while wheeling the car around a corner. One of those painful things that you feel when you cough. Breathe deeply. Laugh. They said the earlier group of symptoms resulted from several causes. First of all, they were in a way of handling a situation. You were not sure that it was safe to communicate spontaneously or easily, emotionally or sexually, with Rupert following the two personal sessions. The cold effectively kept you from physical contact. Ross said, I hadn't suspected this. They said, now it was on the one hand feigned behavior, but the symptoms had to be balanced enough or they would not have served their purpose. To some extent, verbal communication was also minimized. Your condition effectively kept Rupert from making any demands, or from putting any verbal pressure upon you, for the rushed, of course, to your support. You felt to some extent that you had fallen down in taking advantage of the sessions, that you were not putting into practice certain behavior they suggested. Rob said, true. They said, there were of course other reasons also. The question you asked in our sessions was in your mind symbolic of a lack of communication still between you and the Rupert at deeper levels. Rob noted the question about the Clear TV show. They said there was also, even then, in the back of your mind, the feeling that personally you could use the sessions for information in which you were highly interested, and you suspected that Rupert would not share the feeling, or would even unconsciously block it. Rob asked, what kind of information? They said, the question that you asked concerning the TV program was symbolic in your mind to other information. Rob said, "Oh, I understand now." They said, "Hence again the question of communication. Do you follow me?" Rob said, "Yes." They said, "You were quite struck by the lack of communication between yourself and your mother yesterday." Rob noted, "In Sarah." They said, "Or rather, you realized that communicated her feelings very well, and her lack of understanding, while you communicated less, although your attitude in itself. There is, of course, a communication, and I do know of your outburst." The last issue had a part to play in the sigh. Now, woven in all of this was the communication issue, and to some extent, the symptoms served another allied and complementary purpose. You thought you might be able to understand something of Rupert's problem, and you were willing to take a day or two out to feel badly. Rob noted, "This I did not suspect." They said, "Another point. You also felt that the symptoms would take Rupert's mind off of his own for a change, and also let you see how, if or when your reactions to other people were changed or altered because of your indisposition." Rob said, "They were." They said, "Besides this, you thought sometimes that Rupert thought of nothing but himself, and you were saying, 'Look at me! I am not Superman.' And so actually, you were looking for communications that it seemed you did not want in the early part of the cycle." The symptoms were also meant to frighten Rupert, to shock him, to shake him up, and then, hopefully, do him some good, as he saw how it was to have someone around all the time who did not feel very well. Now, you may take your break, for we are going to return along these areas. Rob said, "Okay." They said, "When you act for it, you get it." Rob said, "Okay." Rob noted, Jane's voice was soft throughout. She said her trance was good, yet she was aware of wanting a cigarette at the same time. She hasn't been smoking as much when near me this past week, because the smoke irritates. Now, I wondered how it was possible for Jane to want a cigarette if her trance was so deep. Resume at 9:45. They said, "Now, we will take a hop, skip, and jump to Rupert. Briefly on the cigarettes. It is an automatic part of your session format now, a part of the setting. This is simply for now a brief explanation. For other material, now, again, some of this will sound simple and apparent. He has a rich emotional nature, and he responds emotionally. Programs, his weekly programs, for example, are often a benefit to him, if they are not too extensive, because they give him a short-range challenge which he enjoys." Rob noted, "Today I had been wondering, after I chanced to see Jane's brief list for the week, which she had made out yesterday, whether she should eliminate such activities." They said, "His attempt to have you encourage him up and down and running is a not too well disguised attempt for further emotional involvement on your part. he would be as upset as you over a smothering closeness. However, often he simply feels lonely, not necessarily for your physical presence, for you are often in the house, but for emotional recognition that you are apt to forget about. You are apt to forget about it, simply because in your childhood home, you had to work for emotional isolation. Ram noted, I had a brief coughing spell here, which of course hurt the sigh. This happened a few times during the first part of the session, usually a key bit of material. Finally, Seth let me know in a good loud voice that he helped I noted the spots at which I coughed. I said I was aware of the connection. They said, your personality structures simply respond at times, of course, to different stimuli. Both of you can learn to modify these characteristics, but understanding them is basic. Rupert responds generally to people. One reason, of course, for the classes and their success. But behind Rupert's outgoing characteristics, you run into some rather restrictive ones that are more on the surface, generally speaking, in your personality. Once someone gets through your surface restrictive tendencies, obvious ones, then your spontaneity flows to the surface. Once someone gets through Rupert's open spontaneous characteristics, they are apt to wonder what happened, because he will often not let them get any further. Ram noted a very acute pair of points. They said, hence the fact that his students remain students as a rule, and not personal friends. As you know, those who get through all the way find a bedrock loyalty. But the spontaneous emotional character warms up, brightens, and refreshes what can be a morose inner self at times. Therefore, your emotional response to him is important for that reason. You have not been able to ignore him since he had his symptoms. You might be angry at him, in which case there was a definite emotional response. Or disgusted. He thought in the past, the dim past, disgusted enough to leave him, but you could not ignore him. Rob noted, I had to laugh here. In one way, perhaps hard to describe, it is such a perfect observation on Seth's part. The first sentence of the above paragraph. Jane, as said, watched me tolerantly. I had to watch the laughing, because it hurt my side. Ralph said I never wanted to ignore him. They said, I am giving you some good information. Whether you wanted to or not, he felt that you had. Now, give us some time on this, and remember we have not given that particular material in that way before. Ralph said, true. They said he felt that you ignored him when you became ill, that you were growing so morose that you felt life meaningless. Then the sessions came. Ram noted in 1963. They said, and he felt they had saved you both. They also served to see to it that the two of you spent more time together. Then he felt that all he meant to you was contained in the sessions, that as a woman and a wife, you found him far less fascinating. Other background information you have been given, and this is background for what is coming. It was during your illness that he began to watch your face for a hint of your mood and feelings, a tendency he has relinquished only lately. The physical signs of improvement have been most beneficial to him, forcing him to recognize that betterment is not only possible, but has occurred. The needs seemed all the more obvious by contrast, and to some extent then he focused upon them. He sees the two of you together, doing your own thing, but emotionally enriched interaction. This is what he wants. He has mixed feelings about you and his book. On the one hand, he would like you to read it as he goes along, and at times he envisions enthusiastic discussions about it. He thinks you have emotionally closed off from it, since you never ask him about it. On the other hand, he fears your disapproval and criticism, and thinks you will look for flaws, and so he lets matters stand there. Rob noted, there is some element of truth in the above, but also I feel like Jane would rather I wait until she has the book typed up perhaps halfway before I begin to read it. I can change this idea. I had the idea she would rather I didn't interfere with the gestation of her books. At least, this is the way my reading of them seems to have worked out in the past. They said, the needs are a symbol of the problems, of course, still remaining. He enjoyed your massaging them, but he did not want to ask you to do so, for he saw it as a sign of emotional giving on your part that must be spontaneous and not looked for or demanded. Rob noted, I agree with this data. I would add, however, that for me to be asked occasionally would not be a sign that I was emotionally far away. I expect to be asked, I suppose, when I do forget. I forget without attaching any significance to the forgetting. They said, now, give us a moment. It seemed to him lately that you did not want to dance when he felt at his best, and you wanted him to when he felt less well. Both of you have been making adjustments since our last two sessions, and in a way, Rupert's needs represented the same kind of problem as your symptoms. Matters brought to the head, and yet not acted upon. Rob noted, I think this is very good. They said, now you may take your break. Now, several other points that we will elaborate on later. In his books, he is facing challenges he did not face earlier. Before, a book was a novel. He wrote it through, and that was the end of it. It was all intuitive, emotional, and fictional. He did not need to deal with details, the same kind of organization and overall planning. A draft took him little time. The nonfiction involves him in projects that are of longer duration, and he is handling them very well. He was used to more frequent creative challenges, lesser ones in a way, rather than long-term projects, and he was not capable in the past of the planning, for example, That is now a part of his creative endeavors. As a result, however, he does feel the lack of more frequent, fresh, completely different inspirational material. This can be satisfied through the poetry. Short-term challenges of any kind that are at all practical are excellent to break up for him the long-term purpose of his book. Now, the ramblings about in your apartment in their own way often serve this end. The emotional quality of furniture appeals to him, and without knowing it, the emotional qualities of space do also. The morning situation can be handled from any of numerous standpoints, but they should be emotional standpoints. He can imagine himself up ahead of you, as he thought of, surprising you with your breakfast already prepared. That is one solution. It would help if you kissed him in the morning and made some emotional supportive gesture that also encouraged him to get up. There is more here that we will cover, however. A concerted effort should be made, either to have him face the issue and solve it, or to avoid it completely. He thought of getting up at 4 again. What he does is not nearly as important, obviously, as his feelings toward it, and he has highly negative feelings that cause him symptoms when he does not get up and believes he should. I will cover this much more thoroughly, however. At the risk of being repetitive, if he concentrates upon his work, the morning issue will take care of itself. And by work, I mean not only his writing, but his own individual psychic endeavors. He measures what he does daily against what you do daily, and feels automatically guilty if you do more than he, or even if he is doing watercolors while you are typing a session. He still feels guilty about you going to work in the morning, and not getting up just rubs his nose in it further. He is saying, I may not have to go out to work like you do, but I am punished myself for it, so do not blame me. Rob noted, once again, I had to take the time to laugh, or try to, very cautiously. Jen, as Seth, smiled. Seth said, now we will have some sessions, as you would like, along the lines of your personal affairs, and resume dictation as we all see fit. Does that suit your fancy? I do not want you to have a laughing fit. Rob said, yes. Rob noted there followed a short exchange between Seth and me, after he asked if I had any questions. I mentioned the one I had come up with the other day. What other names has he had in various lives? A list of the names would be interesting, I thought. Seth agreed. He now suggested I ask the question again later, saying the list would run several pages long. He then wished us good night in his usual manner. Seth returned a moment later as Jen and I discussed her getting up on weekend mornings. Seth said, and then on weekends, when you do not have to go to work, he feels bad when you have to see him. Rob noted. Seth returned again as I read this passage to Jen. Seth said, Also, to keep up the pretense. Rob asked, "How do you mean?" Seth said, if he were in good condition on weekends, he would have to ask himself then why he was not good during the week. The self-deception, you see, could not be so easily maintained. Rob noted, Seth returned again when I asked Jane if she could explain why she felt bad on weekday mornings. Seth said, since he is punishing himself during the week, because you have to go to work. Rob said, I wish he wouldn't.